It was supposed to be the happiest night of her life, a birthday surrounded by friends, laughter, and love. But before the candles even burned out, someone vanished, and that night turned into a nightmare no one would ever forget. The night began with music, laughter, and the warm glow of candles flickering atop a cake. Emily Simon had just turned 21, and her family had opened their suburban home for a birthday party that promised to be unforgettable. Friends streamed in, carrying gifts and bottles, the smell of pizza and frosting filling the air. The living room pulsed with music, voices layered on top of one another, laughter rising above it all. Emily, her smile brighter than the string lights draped across the walls, moved from guest to guest, hugging, thanking, laughing. For a few hours, it was nothing but happiness. But no one at that party could have predicted the darkness that was about to consume them all. The story of Emily's birthday would not be remembered for cake or dancing. It would be remembered for the night that ended in terror. The night when two young women, tied together by friendship and celebration, vanished without a trace. The first was Megan Harper. She had been Emily's closest friend since they were little girls, the kind of friendship where childhood secrets grew into teenage dreams, and teenage dreams became promises about the future. Megan had been there helping Emily set up for the party, stringing decorations, laughing as they argued over which playlist to use. She was there when the candles were lit, cheering the loudest when Emily blew them out. Around midnight, Megan excused herself. She stepped out onto the porch to take a phone call, telling Emily she would only be a minute. The air was crisp, the neighborhood quiet aside from the thrum of bass leaking out from the house. Megan's figure disappeared into the shadows. She never came back. At first, no one noticed. The party carried on. People drifted in and out. Cars pulled up and left. Music surged. Voices laughed. An hour passed, then two. When Emily asked if anyone had seen Megan, a few guests shrugged. Maybe she had gone home. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. It was late, after all, and people were starting to leave. By the next morning, Megan's parents were calling frantically. She hadn't come home. She wasn't answering her phone. Her purse, her jacket, her belongings, all were found inside the Dawson house, untouched. Megan had stepped outside into the night, and then she was gone. The police were called, but the initial response was frustratingly casual. A 20-year-old woman leaving a party? She could have chosen to walk away. Maybe she went to a friend's. Maybe she needed space. But those who knew Megan insisted that wasn't like her. She was responsible, dependable, close to her family. She didn't just vanish. The Dawsons, rattled, but trying to reassure themselves, held on to hope. But before detectives could even establish a timeline, before flyers could be printed or searches organized, another blow struck. Emily Dawson, the birthday girl herself, disappeared the very next night. Her parents found her room untouched, her bed unmade. Her shoes sat neatly by the front door. Her car keys were on the kitchen counter. Her phone lay charging by her bedside. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no overturned furniture. Emily had simply evaporated, just like Megan. Two young women, two disappearances, less than 24 hours apart. The town of Brookhaven was plunged into fear. Rumors spread faster than facts. Talk of a stalker, of a predator lurking in the quiet streets. Parents locked their doors. Teenagers whispered about who would be next. The Dawsons, once just another friendly family in the neighborhood, now found themselves at the center of a nightmare. Detectives flooded the home, combing through every inch for answers. It was in the basement that they found something odd. Against the far wall sat a locked wooden cabinet, its key nowhere to be found. When they pried it open, what lay inside was chilling. Dozens of photographs, black and white and color, all of young women, smiling, unaware. But each photograph had something strange in common. The eyes were scratched out. None of the faces belonged to Megan. None of them belonged to Emily. Investigators spread the photos across a table, realizing this wasn't an ordinary collection. Some of the women looked familiar, and one detective swore he recognized a face from a missing persons bulletin years earlier. The discovery shifted the case from a double disappearance to something darker, something predatory. As detectives canvassed the neighborhood, a neighbor across the street came forward. She recalled waking around 3 in the morning. At first, she thought the faint sound she heard was laughter from the party. But then it changed. It turned sharp, desperate. She realized too late that what she had heard were screams. Then, moments later, the screech of tires pierced the silence. Detectives pulled traffic camera footage from nearby intersections. At exactly 3:02 a.m., a black SUV was captured leaving the neighborhood. The license plate was covered. But reflected in the window of a storefront, investigators caught a haunting image, the silhouette of a young woman pressed against the glass. It was Megan or Emily. The search widened. Police combed wooded areas, ponds, and abandoned lots. They stopped every black SUV they could find. The Dawson's neighborhood transformed into a maze of yellow tape and flashing lights. But as days turned into weeks, the case grew colder. Then, a disturbing connection was uncovered. Years earlier, before moving to Brookhaven, the Dawson family had lived in another town. In that town, a teenage girl had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her case was never solved. Her description? Shockingly similar to Megan Harper. Could the Dawson family themselves be involved? It was an unthinkable possibility. Emily's parents were devastated, appearing on television begging for her daughter's safe return. But behind closed doors, detectives questioned every member of the household, probing for secrets. And then, just when it seemed the trail had gone cold, a letter arrived at the police station. There was no return address, no fingerprints, just a plain envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed Emily, alive, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth gagged. Behind her, taped to the wall, was a message scrawled in thick black marker. "You're looking in the wrong place." The image electrified the investigation. Emily was alive, but being held somewhere, and the message taunted police, mocking their every move. Days later, another package arrived, this one left directly on the Dawson family's porch. Inside was a small jewelry box. Nestled inside was Emily's necklace, the very one she had worn at her birthday party, captured in dozens of photos from that night. Alongside it was another note. "She's mine now." Fear rippled through the community. Parents refused to let their children leave home alone. Strangers eyed one another with suspicion. Every black SUV on the road felt like a threat. The Dawsons, now under constant police protection, lived in a nightmare of waiting and not knowing. The FBI was called in, bringing profilers and forensic experts. The Polaroid was examined in microscopic detail. The wallpaper behind Emily didn't match any known building in Brookhaven, But in the corner of the photo, partially obscured, was something odd. A wooden beam, hand-carved with what appeared to be numbers. Were they coordinates, a code, or just another taunt? Investigators were desperate, and as they dug deeper into the photographs from the basement cabinet, their worst fears were confirmed. One of the women pictured was identified as a missing person from a neighboring county, a cold case that had haunted detectives for years. Another matched a girl who had disappeared nearly a decade earlier. All unsolved cases, all young women. This wasn't about one predator. It wasn't about a random disappearance. Someone had been collecting victims for years. And soon, detectives had a name. A man who had once worked as a handyman for the Dawson family. A man with access to their home, their trust, their lives. A man with a history of violence that had somehow slipped through the cracks. His name was Daniel Price. And for the first time, investigators realized they weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were hunting a man who had been hiding in plain sight. The name Daniel Price sent a shiver through the investigation team. On paper, he was unremarkable, a handyman who drifted from town to town, picking up odd jobs, repairing fences, patching roofs. He blended in easily, never drawing too much attention, always polite enough to avoid suspicion. But beneath that quiet exterior, detectives soon learned, was a man with a deeply unsettling past. Price had once been arrested for trespassing on private property, though the charges were later dropped. Years earlier, he had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a young woman in a neighboring county, but with no evidence to tie him to the case, he walked free. To most, he was simply another face in the crowd, a man who fixed your gutters and vanished when the job was done. But there was something investigators couldn't ignore: his connection to the Dawson family. When the Dawsons first moved to Brookhaven, they had hired Daniel to help renovate their basement. He had been in their home for weeks, working late, often alone. He had access to their rooms, their belongings, their trust. And it was in that very basement, years later, that police uncovered the cabinet filled with those haunting photographs. Detectives quickly obtained a warrant for Price's last known residence, a rundown farmhouse at the edge of town, a place locals said was cursed, a place children dared one another to approach on Halloween night. When police arrived, they found the property abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the doors secured with heavy locks. But inside, the air smelled of damp wood and something far more sinister. Rooms were stripped bare except for a few rotting mattresses. A table sat in the center of the living room, covered in yellowed newspaper clippings, stories of missing girls, unsolved disappearances, grieving families. And on the walls, scrawled in jagged handwriting, were words that chilled even the most seasoned officers. She belongs to me. They all belong to me.
But of Emily, there was no trace. No Polaroids, no clothing, no body. Just silence. What investigators did find, however, was evidence of careful planning. A set of maps with certain areas circled, lists of women's names, some with lines drawn through them, others with question marks, and a collection of keys. Dozens of them, all tagged with numbers. To what doors they belonged, no one knew. The discovery painted a terrifying picture. Daniel Price wasn't acting on impulse. He was hunting. Word of the farmhouse spread quickly through Brookhaven, and with it came a surge of fear. Parents kept their daughters home from school. Women refused to walk alone at night. Every creak of a floorboard, every knock at the door felt like a threat. And while police worked tirelessly, they remained a step behind, chasing shadows. Then came the break no one expected. A truck driver passing through a desolate stretch of highway 50 miles outside Brookhaven reported something strange. He had pulled over to rest when he noticed an old barn, its windows glowing faintly with light. At first, he thought nothing of it, but as he sat in his cab, he swore he heard a sound, muffled, distant, like someone screaming. By the time police arrived, the barn was empty, but inside they found rope, duct tape, and the remnants of a chair shattered against the floor. And in the dirt, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a shoe print. When compared against photos of Emily taken on her birthday, the tread matched the sneakers she had worn that night. Emily had been there, alive. The search for Daniel Price intensified. Roadblocks were set up, drones scoured forests, and helicopters thundered overhead. Every black SUV in the region was stopped, every abandoned building searched, but Price remained a ghost, always one step ahead, as though he knew where the police would be before they even arrived. How was he doing it? That question lingered like poison. Investigators began to suspect that someone was feeding Price information, someone close to the case, someone who knew their movements, a mole. And then, just as suspicion threatened to tear the investigation apart, another package arrived. This time, it wasn't left on a porch or slipped into the mail. It was hand-delivered to the police station itself. No one saw who left it. No cameras caught the moment. But when officers opened the small box, they froze. Inside was a flash drive. When plugged into a secure computer, a video played. The footage was grainy, the sound muffled, but there was no mistaking who it showed. Emily, her wrists bound, her eyes wide with terror. She sat in a chair inside a dimly lit room, the camera positioned just a few feet away. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice, trembling, filled the speakers. "Please, help me!" Her plea was followed by silence. Then another voice, low, distorted, dripping with menace. "They all wanted to forget, but I never forget. She's mine until I decide otherwise." The screen went black. Detectives replayed the footage again and again, searching for clues. In the background, barely visible, was a symbol carved into the wooden wall, a triangle intersected by a line. It wasn't random. It meant something, and one officer recognized it. It was a symbol associated with an abandoned mining site on the outskirts of the county. Teams rushed to the location, hoping to finally corner Price. The mine was a labyrinth of tunnels, cold and silent, stretching deep into the earth. Officers descended with flashlights and weapons drawn, their beams cutting through the darkness. Every creak of rock, every drip of water echoed like a scream. Deep inside, they found a room. Chains bolted to the wall, a mattress stained and torn, and in the corner, another Polaroid pinned to the stone. This one showed Emily again, but now her eyes were closed. Had she been killed? Or was this another game, another cruel manipulation? The room was empty. Price was gone. But the message scrawled across the wall told them everything they needed to know. "You're too late." The discovery devastated the Dawsons. Emily's mother collapsed when she heard the news, her father pounding the table in grief and rage. Megan's parents, still searching for their own daughter, clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, the two girls were still alive somewhere. But as investigators dug deeper into Daniel Price's history, the truth grew darker. They discovered that Price's obsession with young women wasn't random. Each of his known victims shared striking similarities: brown hair, bright eyes, athletic builds. But there was something else, something investigators couldn't ignore. Nearly all of them had been connected, however loosely, to the Dawson family. Old neighbors, childhood friends, babysitters, classmates. Daniel Price hadn't been hunting women at random. He had been circling the Dawson family for years. Why? That question gnawed at detectives as they pieced together Price's movements. One theory emerged. Price wasn't just taking victims, he was sending a message. But what message? And why the Dawsons? The deeper they dug, the more unsettling the inconsistencies became. Neighbors described Price as quiet, almost shy. He volunteered at food drives, shoveled driveways for elderly residents, even fixed playground equipment to the local park. But behind the doors, evidence showed he was someone else entirely. A collector of pain, a man who meticulously documented his victims, who taunted police with his arrogance, who believed he was always in control. The tension reached its peak when another letter arrived, this time written in Emily's handwriting. "I'm alive! Stop looking for me! If you keep searching, he'll kill me!" The words broke her parents' hearts, but detectives weren't convinced. They suspected Emily had been forced to write it, another layer in Price's twisted game. Still, the note left the police in a bind. If they pressed harder, would Price make good on his threats? If they backed off, would they lose Emily forever? And then came the twist no one saw coming. Late one night, a woman walked into the Brookhaven police station. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, her body trembling. She introduced herself as Megan Harper. She was alive. The station went silent the moment Megan Harper's voice filled the air. Officers froze mid-step, phones stopped ringing, and every eye turned toward the young woman who had stumbled in from the night like a ghost. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, her clothes torn and smeared with dirt. She looked like she had crawled out of the earth itself. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Detective Ramirez rushed forward, his hand gently steadying her arm. "Megan, it's really you?" She nodded weakly, her tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's coming! He's coming back for me!" They rushed her into a private room, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and gave her water. Megan trembled as she spoke, her words tumbling out in broken fragments. She had been kept in darkness, locked in a basement she didn't recognize. Price fed her sparingly, sometimes leaving her alone for days. She never knew when he would return, only that his presence filled the room with terror. But then one night, the locks hadn't been secured properly. Desperate and half-starved, Megan found the strength to push free. She ran barefoot through fields, hiding from headlights, until she stumbled into town. Her story should have been a moment of triumph, a survivor's return. But Megan's account raised more questions than it answered. When detectives showed her the Polaroids found in Price's farmhouse, she recoiled. She recognized the others, women she had seen chained, crying, whispering in the dark. But she did not recognize Emily. Emily was not with her. And that meant Price was still out there, and Emily was still alive, somewhere. The revelation lit a fire under the investigation. Megan became both a survivor and a witness, her testimony critical in piecing together
Price's patterns. She described his voice, calm, almost gentle,
like he was speaking to a child. She described his rituals, always humming the same tune, always leaving a single candle burning when he left. And she described something else, a symbol carved into the walls of her cell, the same triangle intersected by a line, the same mark found in the mining tunnels. It wasn't random. It was his signature. As Megan recovered, detectives worked around the clock. They traced every property Price had ever worked on, every abandoned building he might have used. The maps found in his farmhouse were studied like battle plans, each circle representing a possible lair. Then came a breakthrough. One of the keys found in Price's collection matched the locks of an old storage facility 30 miles outside town. The place had been abandoned for years, its units filled with dust and cobwebs. But when police cut open one particular unit, the stench of decay poured out. Inside were boxes stacked to the ceiling. Each box contained relics, shoes, hairbrushes, diaries, clothing, all belonging to women reported missing over the last 2 decades. Price had kept trophies, cataloging his victims like a hunter displaying skulls. But one item stood out, a small silver locket, its chain broken. Inside was a picture of Emily Dawson, smiling in her birthday dress. The discovery confirmed their worst fears. Price still had Emily, and time was running out. The investigation turned into a race. FBI profilers were brought in. Analysts studied every line of Megan's testimony, every Polaroid, every map. They built a profile of a man who saw himself not as a killer but as a caretaker, a twisted guardian who believed his victims belonged to him. And in that delusion lay the key to finding him. Detectives realized Price always returned to places tied to his victims. He didn't simply vanish, he lingered in the shadows of their lives, haunting the places they once lived, the places they once laughed. It wasn't enough to take them. He needed to insert himself into their stories. That's when Megan dropped a bombshell. During her captivity, she had overheard Price talking to someone. Not another victim, someone else. A man's voice, calm and assured, speaking with familiarity. She hadn't seen him, but she had heard enough to know Price wasn't acting alone. There was an accomplice. The revelation shattered everything. Police realized why Price was always a step ahead, why roadblocks failed, why raids came up empty. Someone was feeding him information, someone who knew their every move. And suspicion quickly fell on one of their own, Detective Harris. He had been on the Dawson case since day one, often volunteering for late shifts, often the first to suggest new leads. At first, no one questioned his dedication, but when his phone records were pulled, a chilling pattern emerged. Calls made to burner phones, gaps in his timeline, and when compared against Price's movements, the overlap was undeniable. Harris had been tipping him off. The department was thrown into chaos. Harris was arrested, his badge stripped away, his home searched. There, investigators found evidence linking him to the same mining tunnels Price had used. He denied everything, claiming he was set up, but the mountain of proof crushed him. Still, one question lingered. Why? Why would a respected detective betray his oath to protect a monster like Price? The answer came in fragments. Old case files, forgotten reports, whispers from the past. Harris's sister had gone missing 20 years ago, one of Price's suspected victims. He had never found her body, never gotten closure. Somewhere along the way, his grief had twisted into obsession. He believed Price was the only one who could lead him to the truth. and in exchange for information, Harris had allowed him to continue his reign of terror. The betrayal cut deep, but the mission remained: find Emily before it was too late. Megan, desperate to help, offered one final clue. Price often spoke of the place where it all began, a place he described as sacred. She didn't know what it meant, but investigators did. Daniel Price had grown up in a cabin deep in the woods, long abandoned after his parents' deaths. It was there he first disappeared into isolation. It was there neighbors remembered hearing screams at night. It was there the hunt would end. SWAT teams assembled under the cover of darkness, helicopters hovering overhead, their searchlights piercing the forest. Officers moved in silence, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. The cabin stood in the clearing, its windows glowing faintly, just as the truck driver had once described. Inside, Emily Dawson sat chained to a chair, her eyes wide of terror. And standing over her, knife in hand, was Daniel Price. The standoff erupted in chaos. Officers stormed the cabin, shouting commands, their beams blinding Price. But instead of running, he smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and pressed the knife closer to Emily's throat. Take one more step, and she dies. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The air was thick with sweat, gunpowder, fear. Emily sobbed, her chest heaving, her eyes begging for rescue. Detective Ramirez stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Daniel. Let her go." But Price only laughed. "Over? No, this is just the beginning. You don't understand. She was chosen." The standoff stretched into eternity. Every officer's finger hovered on the trigger. Every breath felt like the last. Then, in a blur, Megan appeared in the doorway. She had insisted on coming, against every protocol, against every warning. Her voice rang out through the cabin. "Daniel," she screamed, "it's me! Let her go! Take me instead!" Price's eyes flickered, confusion breaking through his mask of control. For a moment, he seemed torn, his grip on the knife wavering, and in that moment of hesitation, a shot rang out. The bullet struck Price in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He collapsed against the wall, the knife clattering to the floor. Officers rushed forward, pulling Emily free, shielding her with their bodies. But when they turned back, Price was gone. The chains on the wall rattled, the window shattered, and the night swallowed him whole. The forest erupted with shouts, flashlights darting through the trees, dogs straining against their leashes. But Price had vanished into the darkness, leaving only blood in his wake. Emily was alive, Megan was alive, but Daniel Price was still out there. And his final words before disappearing haunted everyone who heard them. "You can't stop what's already begun." Her story ended here, but the shadows that took her are still out there. Subscribe and be ready for our next story.